what are the types, how I can build my standby database. So ideally, Oracle supports three types of standby databases. A physical standby, which is a default. The moment you create your standby database, which will be a physical standby. And the other one is your logical standby and a snapshot standby. Option B is your snapshot. Option C is your logical. So we have three types of standby database, which is ideally possible with the DR database or the standby database. And the default is your physical standby. You go ahead and then create your standby database. Default, your standby database will be in a physical standby mode, and you can convert it to snapshot or logical standby. So physical standby will be in mount mode. The redo or archive will be applied from prod to DR. So you have prod and DR. All the redo and archive will be transferred from prod to DR and then applied on DR. Prod and DR will be in sync. Whatever the transactions are happening on primer side, all the transactions will be applied on your DR side. We can convert prod and DR status. We can convert prod as a DR, DR as a prod. We call it as a switchover or DR drill. So you might have heard in any organization we are doing a DR drill or switchover activity. So once in a year, every customer will perform this DR drill activity, making sure that I can convert my prod as a DR, DR as a prod, and I can run all my reports, all my transactions, and there won't be any performance impact. Let's say I have this prod, which is London data center. I have this is my prod, and this is my DR, which is in New York. So what they'll do, all the reports, all the queries, all the transactions are happening on prod server side. So this switchover or DR drill, once in a year, what they will do, they will make role change. They will make this as a prod, the database which is under New York data center, and then they will make the prod database as a DR database. The log shipping will happen in a reverse direction so that they can run all the transaction, all the queries, all the reporting queries, all the performance load testing, just to make sure that in case of real disaster happens, our DR database should be ready to survive the all the transaction, all the load, whatever the end users are going to connect and whatever the reports they're going to run, whatever the queries they're going to run. So there won't be any impact or performance issue on the DR side. Just to make sure that we do this switchover activity or DR drill activity once in a year. That's a mandatory and must task for DBS to perform in any client once in a year. This DR drill and switchover is mandatory thing. So that is supported. In case of physical standby, we can do this switchover or failover or DR drill activity. Right. In case of prod fails or crashes, we can perform a failover. So we can perform a failover meaning we can permanently my production database is crashed and then I can open my DR database. That's a failover. Failover meaning I'm telling my DR database production database is crashed forever, it will never come back. And then DR database itself we can fail over and you itself you can convert it as a primary so that all the clients will connect. Right, this is a much needed characteristics for any standby database because redos and archives will be continuously applied from prod to DR and your prod and DR will be always in sync and we can convert the status of prod and DR. We can change the status of prod to DR, DR to prod, and in case of prod crashes, we can convert our DR database as a prod and all the end users will connect to this new prod. So that is much needed. And So this physical standby, you can convert it to snapshot standby, and from the snapshot standby, you can convert it to physical standby. And this physical standby, you can convert it to logical standby. So these are the other type of standby databases, snapshot and logical standby. So default is a physical, and along with that, there are two more standby database modes. That's the snapshot and logical standby. So this snapshot standby is convertible. Whatever the physical standby, you can convert it to snapshot, and again from the snapshot standby, you can convert it to physical standby. These changes, these states are interchangeable. These modes are interchangeable. So whereas the drawback with the snapshot standby is when you convert your physical standby database as a snapshot standby, your snapshot standby database will be in open mode, which is read-write mode. And redos or archives will not be applied from prod to DR. In simple definition, let's say I have prod, I have DR. So transactions, whatever happening on the primary side, all the primary side transactions will be transaction 1. So transaction will be applied on your DR side. That's your physical standby. Whereas snapshot standby, you have primary and then you build your replica standby. Whatever transactions are happening on primary side, those transactions will not be applied on your DR side, which is a risky. Your DR, if it's a physical standby, your DR will be open read-write mode. That's fair, that's fine. But your redos or archives will not be applied from the prod to DR. From the prod to DR, whatever the transactions are happening here, these transactions will not be applied on DR side. And your prod and DR will not be in sync. When these transactions are not applied on DR side, your prod and DR will not be in sync. Right? Once they are not in sync, then we cannot convert DR as a primary, primary as a DR. Switchover is not supported. In case of prod database fails, we can convert our DR database, which is a snapshot database, as a primary database, and I can continue to run. So there's a data loss here. Whatever the transaction, whatever the DR and prod will not be in sync, whatever the transactions which will not be applied on DR side, those much of data will be lost on the DR side. When there's a real disaster happens, when production crash happens, that much of data loss is going to happen. So if you are okay with that, then we can go and then use this snapshot standby database. But one advantage with the snapshot standby database is your standby database will be in open mode where you can run your reporting queries. So many customer, what they will do, let's say here, many customer, what they will do, a prod database, they set up a DR database. The DR database is of physical standby database. What they will do, let's say here transactions, the end user transactions are happening on your prod database, and at the same time reporting queries. Like if it's a data warehouse database and there'll be hundreds of reporting queries will run on every day, like informatical load or your e-business general ledger loads and all, or OBI loads, data loads and all, like everyday reporting queries will run. So these reporting queries are select queries. When these queries are run on primary side, primary database will be overloaded. So can I run this reporting? These reporting queries are just a select queries. So can I run these reporting queries on the DR side? Ideally, no, you cannot query. You cannot run your reporting queries on the DR side because DR database is in mount mode. you can run these queries only in open modes. But when your database is in mount mode, you cannot query those select statements or the reporting queries. So what customer will do, morning like 6 a.m. when the business starts, they will convert a DR database as a snapshot standby. They will convert your physical standby database as a snapshot standby. Like you can convert your physical standby database as a snapshot standby, and you can convert the snapshot standby database back to physical standby. This is supported. What customer will do, they will convert morning 6 a.m. this DR database as a snapshot standby database. The moment it is a snapshot standby, DR database is in open mode. And in that case, you can run your all the reporting queries. Whatever this reporting query earlier it was not supported, now your DR database become snapshot standby. You can offload your reporting queries from production database. I'm not going to run any reporting queries on the production database. I'm going to run it on the snapshot standby database because which is in open mode, we can run any reporting queries. After that, I can continue to run this reporting queries whole day until my business runs. And in the night, 6 p.m., I can convert this snapshot standby database back to physical standby. So whatever the 6 hours of archive log, 6 hours of redo logs, whatever generated on primer side, which will not be applied on standby side. The moment at 6 p.m. I can convert that snapshot standby database back to physical standby. Whatever the 12 hours of transactions are happened on primer side, all will start get applied on standby side. It may take 1 hour, it may take 3 hours, it may take 6 hours. Whole night I can leave my standby database as a physical standby. All that entire day transactions are happened on primer side will be applied on DR side. Again morning 6 a.m. next day business hours I can convert this physical standby database as a back to snapshot standby database. Right. So this is one of the use case where you can offload your reporting queries from production database to standby database, provided your standby database has to be converted from physical standby to snapshot standby so that you can run any queries. But the drawback with this one is your prod and DR will not be in sync. In the daytime, your prod transactions will not be applied on DR side and that much of data loss. Let's take a scenario. Your database is in a snapshot standby database from morning 6 a.m. till evening 6 p.m. At 5 o'clock, 5 p.m., there's a disaster happens. Your primary database got crashed. And you cannot convert your standby database. You cannot open your standby database. And then you can ask your end user to connect to your new primary database because from morning 6 a.m. to evening 5 p.m. that much of data loss is going to happen on the DR side, right? That's a data loss in case of any disaster happens. So your DR will not be in sync, and then whatever the transactions are happened, those transactions will be lost. That's a data loss. If you're okay with that, and you can go for this activity, converting snapshot to physical standby to snapshot, vice versa. During the daytime, you can offload your all the transaction from primary to standby. That is your second type of standby database. And the third one is logical standby. Logical standby is again your standby database is in open mode, and instead of redo or archive will apply on the other side, here SQL will apply, which is a less efficient, and your prod and DR will not be in sync. Right? The moment you open your standby database, your prod and DR will not be in sync. Meaning, let's say this is your physical standby. So physical standby, and then this is your snapshot standby, where the transactions will not be applied and it will not be in sync. And the third one is your primary, and you are gonna build a DR or the standby, and your a DR in the physical standby is in mount mode, and in a snapshot standby, which is in read and write mode. And in case of the third option, logical standby, your DR will be read and write mode or open mode. Here also it's open mode. Your logical standby, your DR will be in read write or open mode, and whatever the transactions are happening on primary side, all those transactions will be applied on DR side. How it gonna apply? The transactions will be converted as a LCR, logical change record. Whatever the queries they're running on the primary side, same queries will be ran on the DR side. That's your SQL apply. Rather than redo or archive, which is going to apply from primary to standby in case of physical standby. Whereas in case of logical standby, instead of redo, apply and standby side, the transaction itself, whatever the query, insert query they ran here, the same query will be re-executed on the DR side. That's your SQL apply. That's a LCR, logical change record. Whatever the transactions end users are going to perform on the primary side, same transactions will be transferred to DR and re-executed the same query on the DR side, which is less efficient. Rather than applying your redo, which is a more efficient on the DR side, the LCR, the SQL apply on the DR side, which is the less efficient. That's one drawback why logical standby is not recommended. And the other one is your prod and DR will not be in sync because your DR is in open mode. End users or anyone can connect to DR and he can create his own object. He can do his own customization on the DR side because your DR is in open mode. Your prod and DR will not be in sync, and where DR is having a different data than the prod because your DR is in open mode. Anyone can create any of these objects, any customization they can do it on the DR side, and which will not be supported your switcher activity. Switcher activity meaning your DR and prod data is dissimilar. And in case of any failure happens, you want to do a switchover or failover, you can convert to a prod database as a DR and DR database as a prod, which is not supported. So those are your supported standby database modes and advantages and the disadvantages. With having said that, all these three modes, the physical standby is a default one, which is the most preferred one. 99% customer willing to go with the physical standby. The idea behind that is from physical standby, you can convert it to snapshot standby. And from the snapshot standby, again, you can convert back to physical standby. Again, same thing from the physical standby, you can convert it to logical standby. But from logical standby, you cannot convert it back to physical standby. So the drawback with the snapshot standby and logical standby is it will not support your switchover activity. You cannot convert the roles from prod to DR or DR to prod. But whereas physical standby, you can convert the role and perform your DR drill activity. And the drawback with the snapshot standby and logical standby, your prod and DR database will be dissimilar. In case of snapshot standby, your prod will not be in sync with the DR or DR will not be in sync with the prod. And in logical standby, your prod and DR will not be having same data. It will be having a dissimilar data. So those are your drawbacks and advantages. So any questions so far on the types of standby database?
Sir,
Yes,
physical standby mode, there is a mount mode is there.
Right.
Can we only read-only mode is apply there?
That's a different thing that is called your different license, active Dataguard license. From the Oracle side, I'm going to talk about that little bit later. So what I told, Right. So what I told, physical standby is a default mode. 99% customer will always go with the physical standby mode. And the drawback with the physical standby mode is your DR is in mount mode. So the transactions are happening on primer side, some reporting queries, which is read select queries, which will be happening on primer side. So can I run these reporting queries on my DR side? Answer is no. You cannot run your reporting queries on the DR side because your DR is in mount mode. So being physical standby is the more default mode, and 99% customer is going to use your physical standby mode for their production use case because it's going to allow you to do the switch over failover activities, and prod and DR will be always in sync. But is there a way I can offload these reporting queries on the primary side? Yes, that is possible. For that, you need to buy a separate license from Oracle. From Oracle, you need to buy a license called ADG, Active Data Guard. The moment you buy this separate license from Active Data Guard, what Oracle will support, instead of mount mode, your status will get changed to read only with apply. With apply meaning whatever these transactions are applying on the DR side, it will be as it is. But instead of this mount mode, your database will go into read only mode. Once it's read only mode, then all these reporting queries you can run it on the DR side. You can offload that reporting queries from production side to DR side, so that we're gonna meet whatever the benefits we used to get it from Snapshot standby, whatever the benefits we used to get it from logical standby, all the reporting can be done on the DR side. At the same time, your DR will be in sync mode, read only with apply, meaning all the transactions, whatever happening on the primer side, will be keep on applying as usual on the DR side. At the same time, your DR will be got opened in read only. So that is your a separate license. You have to get it from Oracle Active Data Guard license. All
Okay,
right.
from which database version onwards this snapshot standby supported?
It is there from very beginning. Your
Okay,
10G, 11G.
okay,
Not sure on the
and
version, but it will be a
okay, fine.
old.
And coming to this data guard, if we run any query in the primary DB, the statistics are recently gathered. The same will be there in our standby environment as well, right? Because
Right.
I'm just doing one reporting purpose in the snapshot
That's
standby
correct.
database. Okay,
That's
okay,
correct. Any transaction you do on the primer side, it may be a SQL transaction, it may be a gather stats, it may be any performance tuning, all will be replied on your standby side.
okay, good.
All right.
Hello.
Yep.
So, in case of Oracle e-business suite, if we run on a report from production server, it will automatically run it from standby server.
It has to be physical standby with active data guard. You cannot run the reporting queries on the standby side. Right? That's what I explained. It has to be either snapshot standby, you can run the reporting queries, or it has to be logical standby, then only you can run the reporting queries on the standby side. In order to run the reporting queries on the standby side, which is a physical snapshot, for that you need to buy a separate license, active data guard license from Oracle, so that your standby mode will get changed from mounted mode to read only with apply, so that you can run any of your reporting queries on the standby side.
But my application on is connected to production, right?
Application, again, you have to ask your all the application team, whatever the reporting applications, you have to reconfigure to point to a DR, the TNS details of DR. Right?
So,
You cannot connect to production and run the reporting on the DR side.
in the
Your
same
end
application,
users,
basically in Oracle e-business suite, in the same application, or a guy is entry some entries and he also ran on some reports.
yeah.
So,
So that is not possible. You cannot connect to primary and then run the reporting queries on the DR side. So you have to reconfigure or you ask your end users to connect to your DR database with the DR TNS details. Then only you can run the reporting queries over there.
But application URL same, right?
Yeah, again, application is a different story, right? While configuring your application, you are going to give the TNS details. If you give a production TNS details, it's going to connect to production database. If you give a DR database TNS details, it's going to connect to your DR database.
Malik, is possible to see active Dataguard in lab?
Active data guard. Again, that's a licensed one. You can you can set up your active data guard. You can configure your active data guard. You can do whatever you want it. Again, as I said, for a training or education purpose or learning purpose, you can play around that. But when you do an enterprise use case and you're running your own business, then Oracle will do auditing. Then you have to pay the license charge. In lab, we can practice that. No worries. All right. The next one is these are your types of standby database. The three standby databases